Alistair, Managing Director of Profitability Partners. Great to see everyone well dressed. I didn't realise, I've been to this before, but I didn't realise I'd have to wear a suit, so that was the last time I wore one, was a while ago. I look a lot younger there. Ties are not my thing anymore, and it's great to see no one's wearing one, but I did own one stage. So I've been in the industry for about 10 years. I love hospitality. I got to work with so many great venue owners. So about a year and a half ago, and people tell me I was crazy for doing it, I bought my own venue. It was something that's really helped me learn a lot about the industry, understand the challenges. So I have been doing all sorts of things in that venue, crazy things like dishes, head chef, serving cocktails, all sorts of stuff. But what it taught me was that it's not all about numbers, even though that's what I'm going to talk about today. To me, numbers are just an indicator of performance, not of how well you're doing in a venue, really. The well you're doing is one thing. Numbers just give you a guide at the end about whether or not you're profitable, but there's so many more aspects to it. Sorry, I must be a long way from the thing. It's not quite working. It's pushing it 5 or 6 times to get it through. So when I was looking at the 4 steps to what I thought made a profitable venue, I came up with just a simple acronym. I thought I was being clever calling it PERI after the chili, being hospitality focused. But it's just, what I do is I look at these 4 steps, and there's a lot behind each one, but I go through these things: planning, executions, results and improvement. So by structuring it this way, I was able to, when I was looking at numbers, looking at certain numbers for each stage, looking at certain plans for each stage, but actually really making sure that each time you're putting a new program in your venue, you're putting it into one of these categories to see whether it actually does achieve one of these goals. So I'll go through planning first. So what I consider planning, I don't consider that it's likely that you'll just achieve a profit through hope. You might, but it's a bit like, to me, trying to get to a destination that you've never been to before without a map. So I consider that you have to plan to make a profit. And one of the equations I put in here is that sometimes you might achieve, with a map, you still might get to your destination, but whether it's luck or sometimes too, a lot of experience, because we've got a lot of experienced operators in this room, you might still get there. But it's about putting a plan in place that is not just for you as a venue owner, it's also for a venue manager to achieve goals, it's for a chef to achieve goals. So the main part about planning for me, so I try and section everything off, and I try and keep it as simple as I can when I plan. So I came up with this simple pie chart. So we'd all love to achieve some of these goals. 30% wage is a bit of a dream now, it's tough, but it happens. COGS at 30%, overheads rents 20%, so you hopefully got some sort of profit at the end, and the pie representing sales. It's something that I try and visualise and try and put together all the time when I'm working in a venue, working with clients, so that we make sure that we're sectioning things off and we're achieving different goals at each different stage, and every different stage of the planning process. So just some planning steps, and this is the part that's key for me, is the first part of it. I do see a lot of venues do have a budget, but it's something that seems to be sort of something that people look at and set, but they don't really focus on. My belief is that you have to look at a budget all the time. You have to be referring to your budget all the time. Every time you look at a report or a number, you need to be referring to your budget in some way, is my belief. However, I see a lot of budgets and they tend to have a lot of numbers, a lot of difficulty, a lot of built-in complications. So my number one thing with a budget is keep it simple. So that's why I brought up that pie chart, is because it's a simple diagram that demonstrates how the key numbers you need to be looking at your budget and not trying to overthink it and overdo it. Every number needs to be in your budget, but it has to be in a way that's easy to read and easy for your organisation to read. You have to know what your key numbers are, which is what I demonstrated in the pie chart, and I think as owners you all know that it comes down to sales, wages and COGS mostly, everything. So it's sales, wages and COGS are the most important thing. To me, setting a budget too, it's got to be realistic. So I've seen budgets where someone might have planned for a wage cost of 15% when they've been achieving 35, 40%. Probably even at that level, it's not even realistic to achieve 30. So you've got to keep it realistic. And my number one thing, and I always find with budgets, is you've got a venue, you've got commitments such as a venue owner, you might have to take a wage, or as a venue owner, you might have loans to pay. So you've got to make sure the budget's high enough to actually set it and achieve that goal. But as I said about the budget, it's one thing to set one, and I've heard a lot of comments around the budget. Sometimes you set and then you don't know what to do with it next. And that's where I think the next steps are actually just as important as the budget. And that's the execution phase. And a budget's often set a year ago. Some people reforecast it 6 months, they have a look at it again. But generally, it's a document that you don't know what's going to happen. And the speaker that spoke first gave a good insight about some of the changes that may happen looking forward and things like that. But whether we see an interest rate drop this year or whether we see it next year, whether consumer demand starts to come back, we don't know exactly when it will happen. However, we can think about it on a more short-term basis and start planning for it on a week-to-week basis and hope that it happens soon. So adapting to market change is just actually, to me, about forecasting. So we have to make sure we're forecasting, and forecasting isn't just about an owner setting it or a chef, or it's everyone in the organisation understanding where those numbers are to me. I have simple examples where we might have, well, a manager can't be there for all the time, a venue manager. So just understanding, the staff understanding or a supervisor understanding that if it's quiet, you need to start making some changes, or if it's too busy, you might have to call some people in. There's all sorts of changes you need to make sure that everyone understands and everyone knows those numbers. And I have a big thing about forecasting that you need to be looking at it every day. There's only two numbers you really can look at in a venue that are really reliable every day, and that's sales and wages. So it's the two numbers you can compare every day, set a goal for every day, and make sure you achieve a good result every day. Some days are quiet, some days are busy, but then that's why I say, well, then if you're looking at every day, you can maybe at the end of the week make some changes on a Sunday, Saturday to try and boost those numbers or lower those wages, or do whatever you can. And last one being analyse those numbers, making sure that those numbers are looked at after the fact, try and learn from them. And I'll go through the improvement process to understand that a little bit more. So for me, this part of it though, execution, it's still coming back to your budget, still trying to achieve a budget and understanding where it is every day. This is, to me, a simple forecasting template I put together. There's a lot of numbers on there, but it's very colours focused. And I find when you're forecasting and everything you're doing, a lot of decisions get made and they seem to me a little bit overcomplicated. If you're making decisions good or bad, which is green and red, then you're making binary decisions and you're making decisions that are more reliable. So it gives you a much better indicator of your performance. And this template's adaptive. When I put it together, I'm working on putting it into Power BI, but it's currently in Excel. It changes as the week goes. So you put your numbers in and it starts giving you your venue manager, your chef, a good idea of how the week's going and how they're performing. And if things are not going quite to plan, in this case scenario, kitchen was going great for the week, bar was not going quite so well. Whether that's good or bad depends on your venue, depends on whether you rely more on food and where you make your margins. But it gave a good guide to the venue manager that he perhaps needed to work on his side of the wages more, whereas the kitchen was probably the opposite scenario. Didn't have to do, he was achieving a great result for that week. And this is probably the accounting side of me. I don't know if I mentioned I'm an accountant, but this is the accounting side of me where I look at results, and this is where you can actually check those results are working. So the third step, I'm about to throw this buzzer. So you can analyse, this is where you look at analyse your key numbers, but I find just looking at reports and looking at monthly reports, I don't find that frequent enough. Daily, you can't really get a reliable number daily of your profit, but you can get a reasonable estimate on a weekly level. You can still compare a budget every week. You can still compare it against your previous weeks. There's all sorts of comparisons you can do at this level to make sure that what you're doing is working. So I sort of developed the weekly profitability report because it was sort of when I came into monthly meetings and when I was looking at monthly reports, a little bit frustrating that clients would be fingers crossed wondering whether they make a profit or not. Whereas now with this weekly focus and this more frequent focus, the monthly process becomes more about improvement rather than numbers, because everyone knows basically a good idea whether they made a profit or whether they achieved budget before the meeting even starts. It becomes a lot easier conversation, and it also becomes a better conversation weekly with managers, knowing these numbers weekly. So I don't know if there's a lot of venues out there that still don't focus on a weekly profit and loss, but I think it's extremely important. It's still something I'm trying to develop with a lot of new clients at the moment. And probably the most important part, and this is the part that I find is one of the hardest ones to get commitment from or understand, is that improvement step. Now, a lot of people have a coach for sport or have life coaches, but having a coach that can actually, a coach to me is so important in many levels, such as to help you achieve your goals and to do certain things. And it's basically how you improve, but it's something that I don't see a lot of in the hospitality industry. A financially focused coach. You have a lot of people in other areas, but in finance, probably one of the, well, not the most important, but one of the most important areas, something that's often neglected. So that's just a quote from Bill Gates on here, how he thinks it's important. And to me, I do a lot of coaching meetings. I enjoy, clients, and I do it on a weekly basis. I get some clients that tell me it's probably the key to the whole puzzle. It's one thing to have all these numbers and have all these reports and have all this information, but it's another one to help you understand it. It's another thing to have someone ask you questions on how you went. I suppose I have a unique perspective because accountants often don't talk this way. They don't talk about how you should, your numbers a certain way, and they often don't hear things like, well, it's not all about numbers, which is something that venue I know is a unique perspective. And coaching gives you that accountability. So I have asked a question. You said you had a goal, for example, to achieve a certain result. You didn't achieve your sales. Your wages went up. What happened? Just to make someone think about it when they have that next scenario. A little bit of peer pressure and a little bit of feedback on that helps them understand that it's probably something they shouldn't do again. And what it leads to is better results, is what I've always found. So, and feedback aspect is extremely important in that coaching part of it, because it's something that likes positive feedback, but sometimes it's just important to hear that sometimes it's not all good and it's a bit negative, and it's always constructive and it's always helping you improve. And the whole process through this, and this is something that I think I go back to when I first started studying accounting, and it was something that wasn't thought of, was what I didn't feel through my career, is that the role of an accountant is to help with your decision making. And all the reports and all the things that I've presented here today to help decision making. So these are micro level decisions, these are macro level decisions. So you've got certain decisions being made by managers, chefs, venue owners, not having to make as many as in this process, unless of course they're an operator of the venue. So it's really important from a decision statement to have the right tools, have the right information, and to understand who's making the decisions, trusting managers, trusting chefs to make decisions that help you make profits and to give them the tools to achieve those profits. You've got goals and commitments that you need to meet as an owner. You might have multiple venues. So I've got a case study, I've got a couple of minutes, so I have to fly through it, where I have a venue manager, and I'll go through that now. So this was a group that had 4 venues. And when I started working with them, the feedback I got from the owner, who wasn't working the venue, he had 4 venues, he couldn't be there all the time, was that he didn't understand, his managers didn't really understand his numbers. He wasn't unsure, he was a little bit unsure how to get them to understand their numbers. They had a finance manager involved who was very sceptical that anything would work. She tried working with the manager and getting them to understand it, it just was constantly frustrated. But the good part about this venue was it had strong sales, really, but very high wages, very high cost of goods sold. No budgeting process. No real process about, everyone was just, the belief was through the organisation, wages are high, costs are high. Putting this process in place, they achieved things around really quickly as a group. So when I was talking about the 30-30 principles, they're not quite there yet, but they were achieving 33% as a group in COGS, 35% in wages. They put plans in place and they went along the lines of, I think it was something along the lines of 30% wages, 28% COGS, and they didn't quite get there. But by having the goal, you can see they made a massive improvement. And I have an individual venue here where it's the closest, I picked this one because it's the closest I could find to the 30-30-20 rule, just to show you what is achievable. And it's something, and this is the blue line represents the first 18 months before I started working with them, and the second is the orange is the second 18 months. Just to show you it can be achieved just through planning and through accountability and through a results focus. And an improvement focus is probably the main one. But like I mentioned, it's not all about the numbers. There were so many benefits from doing this that improved conversations, improved confidence in the venues. Managers started believing that they understood where the numbers need to be and were making decisions constantly to improve things. And it didn't just come down to the wages improved, everything else improved. It came down to other things. There was less stress in the venue, so there was just these all non-financial benefits. And the biggest one being that the owner had so much confidence in how things were going, to acquire his 5th venue. In the market like at the moment where not everyone's looking to acquire, it's probably even a better achievement for him. But that's just all achieved through understanding. Okay, much more, my time's run out. I don't know if I've got time for questions, but discretion. Okay.
Got a question for Alistair?
None, maybe.
How do we become Bill Gates? That's what I'll ask you.
I'm not Bill Gates, so...
Yeah, but you have the screen.
Only for his quote.
No questions for Alistair?
All right, thanks everyone.
Give it up for him.
Thank you.
You guys are allowed to ask questions. It's very informative. Thank you. Love the feedback.
Hard audience,